Just before we get started with today's video, I will say that it's brought to you by Beard Blaze. Some of you might have heard this before, but I've got another channel called Brain Blaze, and that channel actually led to the development of this very product. Long story short, I told a joke about how all YouTubers have a beauty range, and a fan of that channel called Will emailed me like, Simon, don't make a beauty product, but do make a beard product. Look at your massive beard. You could make something for that, and other people who have beards. So, Will sent me a bunch of samples of different beard oils that he cooked up in his lab. I tried them out, we chose the best ones, and we made them available on beardblaze.com. Since then, we've also launched a beard shampoo and conditioner, which you can also pick up at beardblaze.com. And if you don't have a beard and you're thinking, oh my god, I'm wasting so much of my time watching this ad right now, well, it's the holiday season. Maybe your dad, your brother, your husband, your cousin, anyone in your life who has a beard and you need to buy a gift for, beardblaze it up at beardblaze.com. And let's get into today's video. When they first appeared in the mid-World War II years, Fiat G-55 Centauros matched up surprisingly well against Allied aircraft like the P-47 Thunderbolts, P-51 Mustangs, and Supermarine Spitfires, which would become their adversaries in the skies over Italy, North Africa, and the Mediterranean. Featuring long, streamlined fuselages, cockpits set slightly aft of center, and large engine compartments for their robust power plants, the Fiat designed and built aircraft were used by the Regia Aeronautica RA and the Aeronautica Nazionale Repubblicana ANR between 1943 and 1945. Thanks to their enviable performance and lethal armaments after competitive trials against venerable aircraft like the Messerschmitt Bf-109s and the Focke-Wulf 190s, many Luftwaffe pilots regarded them as among the best Axis fighters. But though multiple variants were produced, in the end they were built in such small numbers that they had little impact on the outcome of the war. By comparison, America produced about 15,000 Mustangs, Britain built 20,000 Spitfires, and Germany produced more than 30,000 Bf-109s. Due to budget constraints and a relatively small aircraft industry, Italy kept a number of outdated biplanes in service in the early war years, but even by the late 30s it was evident that they were all but obsolete for most combat roles. Hence, aircraft manufacturers began designing new monoplanes, many of which swapped radials for more streamlined and powerful liquid-cooled engines. G-55s were nearly 31 feet long, 9.4 meters, had wingspans approaching 40 feet, that's 12.2 meters, and were capable of taking off at a maximum weight of 8,200 pounds, 3,720 kilos. Power came from inverted V12 Fiat RA1050 RC58 engines, which were license-built versions of Daimler-Benz's DB605A1. With more than 1,450 horsepower, turning three-bladed propellers, power was sufficient to propel early G-55s to a top speed of approximately 390 miles per hour, 625 kilometers an hour, and at a service ceiling of nearly 42,000 feet. G-55s were initially armed with a single 20mm Mauser cannon positioned between the engine and the cockpit, resulting in the long barrel resting between the engine banks and firing through the center of the propeller hub. Though complex, this layout made the cannons easier to aim than wing-mounted guns, which were angled toe-in. Later variants got 4 additional 50 caliber machine guns housed in the upper and lower engine cowlings that fired through the arc of the propeller with help from an interrupting gear, which ensured that the projectiles didn't hit the blades. In addition, some were equipped with underwing hardpoints for bombs and drop tanks, while others were purpose-built torpedo bombers. The first prototype flew at the end of April in 1942 and immediately solidified itself as an aircraft with great promise. Thrust into trials against other promising Italian fighters like the Macchi C-205V Veltro and Reggiani RE-2005 Sagittario, which were collectively referred to as Series 5 aircraft, each shared the same licensed-built Daimler engine. The competition demonstrated that Centauros were either at or near the top in a number of categories, including the strength of their airframes and their ability to perform well at various altitudes. One drawback, however, was that they exhibited pronounced leftward pull, or yaw, during takeoff due to the engine's abundant torque. This was common among single-engine aircraft and was easily remedied by offsetting the vertical stabilizer slightly. Like all aircraft, each of the Series 5 machines had inherent design flaws and unorthodox handling characteristics, but the G-55 and C-205s were deemed to be the best, and both were ordered into production. Between December of 1942 and February of 1943, a number of exploratory commissions, including Luftwaffe officers and technical personnel, visited Italy to assess the Series 5 fighters, and they brought FW-190 and Bf-109 fighters with them to test the new airplanes in mock dogfights. In addition to determining the strengths and weaknesses, Hermann Goering championed the idea of increasing Axis aircraft production through standardization. Overall, the Germans were impressed with the Centauro's firepower and performance, the latter of which was largely attributed to their larger wing surface area. The Luftwaffe liked the RE-2005 as well, though it was significantly more time-consuming and expensive to produce. The Macchi C-202 didn't perform well above 26,000 feet, and its assortment of relatively light 30 and 50 caliber machine guns lacked the knockdown power of the G-55's cannons. All told, G-55s were considered more than a match for any aircraft they might face in combat, and though it would never come to fruition, the Germans tentatively agreed to produce them in their own country, where manufacturing them was much more efficient. Aside from positive test results, German interest stemmed from the aircraft's inherent development potential. Since they were larger than their contemporaries, G-55s were perfect candidates to receive even heftier and more powerful DB603 engine variants that couldn't be stuffed into Bf-109 airframes no matter how hard the engineers tried. Germany acquired 3 airplanes for additional evaluation prior to the proposed production run, though the project was later abandoned because it would have interfered with the high-demand frontline fighters already being built. Though originally envisioned as a dogfighter, by 1943, Allied bombing raids over Italy had reached a fevered pitch, and there wasn't a high-altitude interceptor in the stable that was capable of dealing with them effectively. To combat this growing threat, Fiat received an order for 1,800 G-55s, and the number was later upped to 2,400. Initially, 34 pre-production units were produced, which included minor upgrades that improved handling and performance and allowed the planes to carry 2 350-pound, 160-kilogram bombs or 2 100 US gallon, 378-liter drop tanks on hardpoints under the wings, but by the summer of 1943, only 19 had actually been built. Then, on July 25, 1943, dictator Benito Mussolini was voted out of power and arrested as he departed from a meeting with King Vittorio Emanuele, and less than a month later, representatives from the Kingdom of Italy, Britain, and the United States signed the Armistice of Cassabile. In mid-September, Nazi commandos freed Mussolini from the hotel in which he had been imprisoned, after which Germany routed Italian forces in a number of offensives and ultimately established the Italian Social Republic as a puppet state. Meanwhile, the king, the government, and most of the navy escaped to territory occupied by the Allies. After these events, nearly all G-55 served with Mussolini's new fascist air force, the ANR. Manufacturing took place at Fiat's factory in Turin, but G-55s were barely trickling off the assembly line, and after a particularly heavy bombardment at the end of April in 1944, production ground to a halt. Afterward, by decree from German authorities, production was decentralized, after which only final assembly took place in Turin, and by the following September, the remaining aircraft were abandoned in various stages of completion. It took Fiat approximately 15,000 man-hours to manufacture one G-55, while German factories could produce Bf-109s in about 5,000 hours, so building the former just no longer made sense considering how similar the aircraft were. The first Centauros entered service in early 1943, and just a few months later, many were busy intercepting Allied bombers and the escort fighters like Mustangs, Thunderbolts, and P-38 Lightnings that were tasked with protecting them. But following Operation Husky, the invasion of Sicily in July 1943, the Allies finally had a relatively secure foothold, and the bombing stopped when Rome was declared an open city. The designation meant that the city had abandoned all defensive efforts, which is something invoked in hopeless military situations to avoid needless death and destruction, and in accordance with international law, the Allies were forbidden from further bombing. Some Italian pilots surrendered themselves and their aircraft to the Allied forces in the south, while dozens more were commandeered by the Luftwaffe and the ANR. By that time, however, less than 150 aircraft were in service, and maintaining them had become increasingly difficult. Most Axis-aligned forces were re-equipped with Bf-109s, though Italian pilots preferred the G-55, perhaps more out of national pride than anything else. One Centauro was spirited away to Britain in the summer of 1944 when test pilot Serafino Agostini defected with a recently freed RAF officer sitting on his lap in the cramped cockpit. In the early war years, Italy had a number of outdated torpedo bombers like the tri-motor SIAI Marchetti SM-79. This had inflicted significant losses on Allied shipping, but by 1942 they had largely outlived their usefulness. To replace them, Axis brass came up with the idea of building a dedicated single-engine aircraft to deliver torpedoes in a concept known as the torpedo fighter. It was theorized that such aircraft stationed along the coast could travel hundreds of miles out to sea at high speeds and launch 1,500 pounds, that's 680 kilogram torpedoes, after which they'd be able to confront Allied fighters on relatively equal terms. The G-55 fit the bill, though it would be redesignated G-57 and have its liquid-cooled Daimler-Benz engine swapped out for a 1,250 horsepower Fiat radial that was more fitting for the application. Later, after the G-57 project was dropped, standard G-55s were modified to carry even larger torpedoes. To provide more cooling, the engine's radiator was divided into two units, each of which was mounted near a wing root to improve airflow. In addition, the tail wheel was strengthened and lengthened to provide adequate clearance for the bulky torpedo during takeoff. Now called the G-55/S, the new planes first flew in August of 1944. Despite the cumbersome external load, performance was generally good and the ANR ordered 100 aircraft, but the end of the war spelled the demise of the project after only a few had been built. Another variant was the G-56, which was essentially a G-55 with a beefed-up Daimler-Benz engine. Two prototypes were built, and flight tests in March 1944 determined that the moderate increase in horsepower resulted in a big jump in top speed to approximately 440 miles per hour, or 700 kilometers an hour. G-56s got two additional 20mm cannons, though again, German authorities cancelled the project before production began. Additional upgrades were made in the post-war years, and the new and improved Centauros were flown by a number of countries, including Argentina, Egypt, and Syria. Early versions used the license-built DB605 engines, but these became increasingly scarce following Germany's defeat, and later surplus Rolls-Royce Merlin engines were added. These Centauros flew in the early 1950s as both attack aircraft and trainers, the latter of which were two-seaters. Had G-55s been a German design from the outset, they may have been produced in the thousands, but in the end, only about 275 were built during the war, while another 75 followed in subsequent years when nearly all piston-engine aircraft were being replaced by jets. So I really hope you found that video interesting. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button below. Don't forget to subscribe, and thank you for watching.